Hi, welcome or welcome back to Yeah Right Scarlet Quill Society. It is April somehow, although I forgot that right before I started recording, so I'm glad I looked that back up on my computer. Um, while you're thinking about things that you can do for spring cleaning, you can hit like, subscribe, all the YouTube things. Um, with my luck, YouTube is going to move where those things are before you see this because that is exactly how media works. So find them. You can also find any links that we're going to talk about down in the description box, our contact information. If you have questions, hit us up, Facebook, Discord, all of the usual things. Um, this month, I am so excited for our topic and I'm so excited for our panelists. We are going to be talking about like how done is your work? When are you ready? When is it ready to go out into the world and how do you get it there? Um, I love that we're talking about publication all year this year. We're just about ready to transition into traditional publication and agents and publishing houses. But right now, we're in that liminal space between uh, I have an idea and I have a book or I have an article. And so I thought I would bring in some great nonfiction writers to ease us along the way, because we have so many contacts, and then so many of us think about that in terms of the fiction space and what the fiction space looks like in terms of submissions and agents, and what does it look like out in the real world. What are some other ways that our ideas get published? What are some other ways that we get to bring those thoughts out into the world, and get the words on the paper or the page or the screen, wherever you're going to put them. But before we dive into that, I do want to talk a little bit about Yeah Right itself and our job in the world. And one of the things that is interesting as we move more into virtual spaces is what connections and what communities do we still connect to uh, in meat space or whatever they're calling it by the time you watch this. Um, and how do we have a nexus with each other and with the land? And one of the things that is still very important to us at Yeah Right is our land acknowledgement. We have our primary nexus is in Portland, Oregon, which is the traditional and current land of many, many peoples. There were actually 60 tribes in Oregon. There are currently 9 federally recognized tribes, but there are 9 tribes off the top of my head in this area: the Multnomah, the Wasco, the Cowlitz, Cathlamet, the Clackamas, the bands of Chinook, the Tualatin, the Kalapuya, the Molalla. And so as part of our duty of stewardship of this land, and it's part of our connection to the land that we're on, Yeah Right donates to the Naya Family Center, um, which provides culturally specific programs and services that guide people in the direction of personal success and balance through cultural empowerment. And so, as I introduce our guests today, I want to also invite you to talk about any organization that you think for you represents having a nexus of community or land. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Jennifer for no other reason than your name's first.
I mean, there are many things in the world. First names is one of them. I don't know. Hi, I'm Jennifer Posner. I'm a journalist, working journalist since the 90s. In particular, my beat is I'm a media critic, and I've been working at the intersection of gender, race, and power in media since before that was like a thing that people did. So it's been kind of a hard road. But I've been doing both freelance journalism as well as books in more recent years for a long time. And I didn't prepare ahead of time to talk about organizations to give back to. But right before we got onto this call, Rowan asked if there was anything, and I thought, well, because we're going to be talking about publishing, and because we're talking in particular about, at least on my side, journalism and community, The first organization that popped to mind is Laura Flanders and Friends, which is maybe an unusual thing to ask for donations for if we're talking about orgs, but this is, I consider, one of the most important media projects in the country. Laura Flanders, formerly the Laura Flanders Show, just rebranded this month as Laura Flanders and Friends. Fiercely independent, progressive, feminist, anti-racist news, syndicated on PBS. They don't take corporate money, so the only way, they're vastly, deeply underfunded, and the only way they survive is through individual donations. They do the kind of reporting and analysis that we wish we could find throughout media, and I think it's really great to support them. And then if we're talking about land, it just occurred to me if it's okay to mention one other organization.
Yeah, jump in.
Okay, so one organization that's close to my heart is HIAS. It's a refugee organization that I didn't even know about until the whole family separation policy became part of the news in the last under the Trump administration, and in that they help refugees all over the world find safe homes. And then I found out, after I had already donated to them, that they helped my family, my father and grandparents, emigrate from Poland in the late 60s when Poland was expelling Jews yet again.
Right, I remember you talking about
Yeah,
that.
so I think that
Yeah.
if we're talking about land and especially migration, especially at a time when there are so many people who are separated from their homelands, this is at least an organization that helps people find new, safe ways to thrive.
Thank you for both of those amazing recommendations. I'm going to go ahead and move on to RF.
Hey, I'm R.F. Terjevics. I've been a journalist off and on since 2006. My beat these days is mostly scams and sort of financial crime. But I've also done personal essay. I've been in a couple of anthologies, mostly personal essay, though the last one was about true crime. I'm also a private investigator licensed in the state of New York. And as for organizations, there is an organization based in New York City called Urban Indigenous Collective. Their tagline is "For Urban Natives by Urban Natives," which I think is awesome. And you can donate to them or find out like what they're up to and how you can get involved at urbanindigenouscollective.org.
I love a URL that's just easy to remember and
Me
descriptive.
too. Me too. As someone
Like,
with an unpronounceable name, I love it when it's like, okay, you can handle that. Though I can't spell indigenous very well. It's all the E's and I's and it just confuses me. But spell check is wonderful. So
vowels are hard.
I'm
Vowels are real
so
hard.
I'm so glad that another writer admitted that they need spell check.
oh,
I am
oh,
so
all the
bad,
time.
always been so bad at spelling. I've been an editor, and yet I've been so bad at spelling.
There are words that are just legitimately ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like receipt.
I would like to take umbrage with Massachusetts.
Oh,
Your
forget it.
S's and your T's are wrong,
Just no.
Massachusetts.
I lived in Massachusetts for college. I
Me
still
too.
need to look it up.
It's impossible. It's
Also,
impossible.
apologies if I yelp. My cat is into trying to get attention by biting the back of my ankles. So if I yelp, it's because Nathan has decided to chew on me just a little bit.
Solid.
Yeah.
There is a 0% chance that a cat will not go through this backspace at some point. I try to keep like cat traps on the couch for them,
Yeah.
but sometimes that doesn't work. And also the dog is having a rough day.
Oh,
But
puppy.
it'll be what it is. But that's, spelling, that actually is a point that I had meant to bring up later in this conversation, but
Sorry.
let's start there, please. No, because I often hear from people as a working submissions editor for a publication for a decade now. I hear a lot of how come, well, isn't spell check your job as the editor? Like people will send me things that are not, they're not spell check. Um, and there's a little confusion about how much editing you have to do before you submit. And I know that in the fiction world, you're expected to be like done, done, done. How is that different in nonfiction? Like, I know you guys get to like pitch and you have some more back and forth sometimes with your editors than fiction writers do. Like, what's the least done you have sent a piece in that isn't just the pitch? Because I do want to talk about the pitch, but
The least done.
like, do you send it in halfway? Or do you
No.
send like a first
Never,
draft?
ever. So I'm on the exact opposite side. I take much longer to do my pieces, but when I'm done, it is I have worried every word and every transition and every fact and every a piece of prose style and every piece of alliteration and every spelling and everything like a dog with a bone, to the point where my goal is for an editor to not have to change anything. And if they do, it's because what I consider a great editor, and I've had great editors and I've had, well, I won't say because I'm still freelancing, but to me, the difference between a great editor and a frustrated writer who wants to be writing but has taken an editor's job is the use of a red pen just because they can versus because it's needed, like it's used as a scalpel. A great editor will go into a piece of mine that I consider done and find the one place where they want more information, or they think something isn't quite as clear. I think it's clear because I'm so close to it, but they're like, I didn't understand this one fact or whatever, right?
Right.
Or they find something else that they're like, this is a little bit repetitive, and I'm like, no, but oh wait, you're right, it is, right? And that, right? A bad editor is somebody who's like, I'm going to change, I want you to change this, and this because I don't happen to like that voice. Or they don't quite say it that way, but it's like, it's not in the voice that they would use if they were writing it, but they're not writing it.
Right. And it's one thing if the publication has a voice though, right? Like you know up front that you need to write towards that voice for the
Oh,
publication.
sure. If you're writing something for, say, Bitch Magazine, RIP, versus something for Utney Reader versus something for the Times, you're going to have a different voice for each piece. But what I'm talking about is,
Yeah.
I want to give, to your point about doneness, I want to give my best crafted piece that is the most complete and the most factually accurate and the most correct in terms of grammar and spelling and style to the editor, so that they have to do the least. And then, to me, one of the best compliments that I regularly get is, oh my God, thank you for clean copy. Like, clean copy in the industry, clean copy is the editor's version of saying, oh, I don't have to do a lot to this thing.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. For me, it depends in terms of quote unquote doneness. It also will depend on my relationship with the editor. With a new editor, I'm not going to take any chances. And like, for instance, if it's an editor that I have a relationship with, they know my work, I know how they work, and I submit something where I have like, I'm like, I want to keep this in, but I'm not sure, but I trust that you know that I know what I'm doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But really, like, to echo off of what you're saying, when I turn something in that's not a pitch, that is the thing, or the first draft of the thing, the idea is that the editor is going to be doing exactly what Jennifer said, which is sort of finding the holes or asking for clarification, or in the case of really great editors, moving things around so that they make better sense. When an editor does that primarily and also cuts stuff, that's when you know you've got a brilliant one on your hands, and they're really hard to find. I've worked with only a few of them who are really solid like that. And you know it immediately. You know it
Yes.
immediately. They don't try to change your voice. They'll suggest words that are a bit clearer here and there. They'll like reverse the order of things, but they're not gonna gut you like a fiction editor might, hopefully. But
Ouch, ouch. In
yeah,
the soul. I'm a fiction
I
editor.
know, been there. But it, it's one of those things where when I'm working with someone I've never worked with before, which is often the case because I am a freelancer, it is nerve-wracking. Like, do I know when the thing is done? How do I know when the thing is done? Usually I know when the thing is done is if I read it out loud to myself or to my partner or a friend, and I don't stop myself to correct things,
Oh,
and
that's a
they
good
don't
trick.
stop me to be like, wait, what? That's when I know that it's like, this doesn't suck as much as I'm afraid it's gonna suck. So you can stop being crazy and just send it in.
I do that too, the reading out loud too.
Oh
I do
yeah,
that too.
that that one's foolproof.
Yeah.
The
I,
other thing is
oh, sorry.
what you were saying about getting too close to your piece. That's so real. That's also where the editor will come in. Um, I come from like a background of publishers and writers, and my father who edited books for longer, well, no, not longer than I've been alive now. I turned 40 on Saturday, so for about as long as I've been
Okay.
alive
Happy
now.
birthday.
Numbers don't actually line up that anyway. He says you really have 3 shots at editing your own thing before you're too close to it. And I'd argue that you probably have about 2.5. If you have a terrible short-term memory like me, it can be used to your advantage because maybe in a week I'll forget more than your average person would forget about something I wrote. So
That's interesting. I'm I've had for many years, I've had writers ask me about my process, young people especially, but even, you know, peers and people older than me, whatever, ask me about my process. And I've always said my process is not healthy. I do not suggest it.
no,
It's the
same.
only way, it's the only way that I've ever, even as I mean, it's never changed from when I was 18 and now I'm in my late 40s. And I've tried to do it differently, but my process is I have an idea. I write out a whole bunch of notes ahead of time. It might be bullet points. It might just be in my head. It might be paragraphs of just random notes, but I don't do the shitty first draft. I wish I could. I've never been able to. I'm like, I write when I say like every transition. I mean, I don't wait to edit at the end.
Oh,
I
right,
edit
yeah.
as I go, right? So basically, I only have one shot at it, but I have a million shots at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was going to say, based on what you're saying before, is I've in addition, I one of the things I look for in an editor is the same thing I tried to do as an editor in terms of cuts. When you're saying like that when they cut things, a huge pet peeve of mine is when people cut for space without I mean, you have to cut for space, right?
Yeah.
In nonfiction, you have
Right.
a specific amount of space, specific word count. If it's newspapers or magazines, it's column inches. Even if it's online now, it's like, oh, well, there's theoretically no, you know, I love long reads, but apparently they do like fucking uh, data analytics and people don't read long anymore.
Right. And
Blah,
it's like you
blah,
get 3
right?
scrolls and then they're gone. And I
So
had an editor who used to say, you have 3 sentences to grab your reader. And if you don't have them
True.
in 3 sentences, they're clicking away.
right. So you have this specific constraints around space,
Mhm.
right? And so I both having been an editor here and there, as well as, you know, doing my own writing, I have a lot of sympathy for the need for editors to cut. But what I cannot fucking stand is when people just take a paragraph out because they don't want to spend the
Right.
time.
Like the flow is
it,
gone.
it's like I will go in and I know this takes longer and this is a problem in media. This is a media economics problem because in
Mhm.
consolidated newsrooms, when you have fewer and fewer people on staff and you have, you know, the few people left on staff have to do the job that 7 people used to do, there's not as much time. But I was having these issues with people 20 years ago too. Where, like for me, what I do, even if it takes me longer, is I go through with a scalpel and I find, let's say it's a 3,000 word piece. I'll go in every paragraph and find 4 words that can be taken out, or three, you know, 2 sentences that can be rewritten shorter, but say the same exact thing in a good way.
Editorial tip, do a global search for ly. The odds that you
Yeah,
can get
yeah.
rid of adverbs are real high.
Yeah.
Real high. If you're looking to cut 10 words out of a 3,000 word piece, cut your adverbs.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a good example, right? But it's like even if it's a case, whether it's a control alt
Mhm.
find this thing,
Right? Yeah.
or it's a you spend your own sort of lens, you train your
Yeah,
lens
however you do that.
more
Yeah.
concise. It's about finding the way that the story shines without sacrificing content. I hate sacrificing the point of the piece or even the thing that makes the piece readable. Because in nonfiction, as opposed to fiction, fiction is all about the reading experience. And nonfiction, a lot of editors feel like it's just about the idea that you're trying to the fact you're trying to get across, and it doesn't matter if it reads in a compelling way. And for me, I want it to be both. I want the reader to enjoy what they're reading, because that's the medicine. That's like what helps them take the medicine of the facts, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's it's so funny you say that, because I was just thinking about that, of like how information is ordered, and that you have three sentences. And you know, when I'm reading stuff and there's that interesting gripping thing, you're talking about whatever the human interest of this is, and then
Mhm.
suddenly it's a wall of facts. I'm like, okay, can we stop with the facts and just keep it moving? But I've actually, I've had to put that into my writing in ways that I'm like, okay, we'll figure out how to do this. But it's funny, like I used to, and I still do, if I, admit it to myself, is like I kind of write, I don't want to say intuitively, but it's like, okay, I'm just gonna sit down and get from beginning to end, and see how crappy it is, and put lots of TKs and start on the second paragraph and blah blah. I mean, with pitches, it starts to become formulaic. And so you can kind of hear the pitch when you're reading whatever the thing you want to pitch is. But that shitty first draft, as you go throughout the span of whatever your writing life is, you're going to get better at those. I'm not talking to you, Jennifer. I'm talking to the
I know.
writer.
Yeah.
I mean, and you feel it.
Cheers to people who can shitty first draft. I also am in cannot shitty first draft.
Yeah, I
Um
mean, yeah.
it becomes less shitty, and it becomes more of a tool. Like, I would argue that your bullet point outline is a shitty first draft.
Yeah, that's
It's a
true.
shitty first draft
I
with
agree with
fewer
that.
words.
Yeah.
I,
It's an
Um,
economical shitty first draft.
because
it's not writing. Those are the
I
ideas,
don't even put the
not
bullet
writing.
points down. I take a lot of long showers, and at the end of a lot of long showers, I will write down one sentence, and that's going to be the piece. And then I'll
Interesting.
just write it around that sentence. No
Interesting.
notes.
Interesting.
A million tabs open on my computer, admittedly, but no notes.
Oh
Um,
God, tabs. I had so many I've been writing a media literacy graphic novel over the last couple of years, and which has never been done in the medium before. So it's been very challenging. Once I agreed to do this project, I realized why it's never been attempted in the medium before. But I had so many. Do you know how when you open in Chrome, like if you have too many drafts, it becomes
yeah, they're
these
just like,
little windows you
Yeah.
can't see anything. I had so many of those that I had kept having to open new
right, I have new
windows,
windows so that I
and
could
there
see
were
what my
so
tabs are.
many, like probably 50 windows full of those mini tabs, that like it was slowing down the processing speed of my
Yeah.
computer.
And before whoever is out there thinking, well, you could just get the extension that lets you organize those tabs into
No.
folders. At a certain point, number one, the folders also become too tiny. And number two, you can't see what's in the folder. You just got the
Right,
folder. So you have to
right.
keep opening the
And
folder, and the
when
tabs are
you're
tiny.
looking at a whole story, I
It
mean,
is.
depending on what it is, I mean, I worked on something a couple years ago for Vice, and the amount of material that was available about this, just because it's, receipts had been collected for 10 years. I felt like I needed like 19 monitors to be able to like literally see it all at once.
Yeah.
I mean,
My second monitor is a 60-inch TV, and I
yeah,
will put windows
it
all over
Right.
just, it just gets nuts. And
That's what I keep looking at over here, in fact.
there's that sexy myth of the investigator slash journalist doing the red yarn string wall.
Yes, conspiracy wall.
I do not do the conspiracy wall, but I've used for mostly it's for, well, for all of it, for background on all of this stuff, especially if you're mapping out timelines or people's relationships to each other or locations,
Mhm.
making those kinds of outlines that are visual with like a flow chart or a timeline, whatever, it can be really helpful.
Fiction writers, you should be doing this too. It
Pardon?
will help you keep your chronology straight, fiction writers. Fiction writers, please make a timeline.
Yeah. I mean,
Your editor will
fiction,
thank you
sometimes you
later.
can hold it in your head differently, like depending
Yeah.
on what it is. For like a novel, I think, you know, it can kind of work, but for something like screenwriting, oh my God, yes, timelines are just like, because it's, yeah, there's too many things to think about.
Yeah.
I can't say what it is because the art hasn't been done. So with the graphic novel, I've both written all the words and I've also written the descriptions of what I want the illustrator to draw. And I used an image of the conspiracy murder
Oh,
board.
the conspiracy, yes.
The conspiracy
Yeah.
murder board. I used an image of that to get across a concept related to media economics, and I'm really excited.
That's cool.
I can't wait for this book. I'm so
Yeah, I
excited
have
for
no
it.
idea. Like you say a media literacy graphic novel, like I am drawing a blank on what it's going to look like, and that makes me even more excited. Don't tell me.
I won't. I
Don't
won't.
tell me. I want to see it. Like I really have no idea how that's going to look, and I really want to know. But don't tell me.
I won't tell you specifics because it's not out yet, so I don't want to give anything away. But I will say that each chapter, the thing that's been really challenging about it is that you want to talk about like when is something done. The reason I mean, first of all, this is a little, can I go off on a tiny little tangent about a case study of when things are done and why it's
Please,
taking so long?
please talk to us
That's
about
not a tangent.
when
That's
things are done
relevant.
and
Oh,
then
that's
when things are right. Like, is that a tangent?
right. That's true. Okay, so
Is it a chord? Circle to circle?
so I was brought this project, unlike everything else unlike most of the other things I've written in the past. I was brought this project. The publisher wanted a media literacy graphic novel because it's first, second books, and they're an imprint of Macmillan. And they decided, the guy who runs First Second decided to launch something called World Citizen Comics, which is a line of comics to encourage citizen engagement. And he wanted, along with how to save democracy and voting rights and a variety of other this, he wanted one on media literacy. They had something involved. Originally, it was going to be something for kids, and the original writer on it didn't really jibe with what they wanted to do. So then they had to find a different writer. That writer dropped out. They had to find a different writer. They came to me because I'm the issue area expert in media literacy, and I said, nope. They're like, what? I don't.
No, thank you.
I was like, well, I don't write in graphic novels. I'm sure I could learn, but that's not really my medium. But more importantly, I have aphantasia, which is a very rare condition, meaning I have no visual images. I am, quote, mind blind. So I couldn't see anything in my head, which would make it even more difficult. And they said, don't worry, we'll pair you with an artist and they'll do everything. You won't have to think of a single visual image. And I said, are you sure? And then I said, also note, because I don't write for children, I write for adults and young adults. And they said, yeah, okay, well, yeah. And so I was talking with my literary agent, and because she was the one who was sort of going through between them and me. And she said, this was literally the first conversation about it. She was very canny. She was like, who do you suggest to do this instead of you? And I was her names, but somebody's mom had just died and somebody else had something. I was like, though they would be perfect, but they're not available. She's like, well, what would you do if what do you think is important for a media literacy graphic novel? And I said, well, I mean, these are the things that would be important. And she's like, well, what would you do if you were doing it? I was like, I'm not doing it. She's like, but what would you do
if you were?
And so I said, well, I would do this, 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 and this, but it would have to be for young adults and adults, not for kids. And it would have to be this, this, and this. And she said, can you write that out in an email, just an email to me? I'm not going to share it with anybody. It's just an email to me. And I was like, if you think it'll be useful for somebody else. So I write her, and I get off the phone with her. I'm a huge perfectionist. Remember I said about no shitty first drafts? But she said it was an email just to her. So this was like this tapped into the same thing as when I used to do my own blog, which I could go back and edit later, right? So I just dashed off an email. I got off the phone with her. I dashed off an email. It took me a half an hour. I wrote out the entire outline of what would then become the graphic novel. And I was like, it had to be for adults and young adults. It had to be separated into 2 sections. The first section would be about sort of tools, media literacy tools, like one chapter on framing and one chapter on representation, et cetera. The second half would be about genres, journalism and disinformation, and like different chapters on ways these tools can play out. And then I gave examples of how I was like, well, since it's a graphic novel, you'd need characters, but since media literacy, if I think it has to be all nonfiction, you can't create fake things. It also has to use real media examples, and the characters would come through interviews with scholars and media activists and journalists and fiction writers and media producers, et cetera. And I sent it to her, and it was full of typos because it was just an email, and it was not spell checked because it was just to her. And she said, just dash it off. And I did. And that night, immediately, this was like 6 o'clock in the evening. She sent it directly to the publisher.
Why?
And he wrote back in the morning, and she forwarded it to me. As soon as he got it, it just said, yes, 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 yes. How soon can we get her?
She suckered you into pitching. She suckered you into pitching.
This was like the worst pitch I ever did, but also the best. Because I didn't know it was a pitch. It was full of typos, but I'm an issue area expert. I've been working on this area for 25 years. So I was like, all right. So anyway, we go through and I still wasn't sold on doing it, but I eventually said yes. And relatively quickly. And this was right before the pandemic. And we announced it in Entertainment Weekly under the title that, within they announced
the working title,
the World Citizen Comics line with all the different things that were going to be in it, and the title was going to be Breaking the News with the in parentheses with a long subtitle about different media literacy things. And then in the interim, the head of Breitbart stole the title for his book about the horrible liberal media screed full of lies. So I have to change the title. My current plan, I really want to use the title now. It's not you.
Don't say it. People steal it. Don't say it.
Oh, who's going to steal it from this YouTube? Anyway.
Hey.
No. I don't think
we are beloved. No, it's true. It's true. Like
nice people.
Everybody ethics. Be ethical.
Exactly. Anyway, the point being that it was before the pandemic, and there was a different set of artists. And then they had to drop out because of family crisis. And then the pandemic happens. And I had a mental breakdown because of the pandemic. And then I needed an extension. And then we had a new artist. And then my mother died. This should have been done 2 years ago, maybe 3. It is now almost done. But
force majeure.
It goes through so many things, right?
Yeah. That's such a good example of all of the things that can happen in the life cycle of an idea. Like people who are on the project change, people, even in a small project. I have had an editor change on an article, and I'm like, this is a 500-word article with a 2-week deadline. What do you mean we have a new editor?
Yeah.
Right.
It's the media machine. I mean, the thing is, I don't want to get on a downer note here, but just about sort of the landscape of journalism is from where I'm sitting, at least. I started as a journalist right out of college. I graduated in 2006, which was probably one of the worst years to graduate from college, because you got a taste of what things were like, and then it all went to hell. But these days, I think no matter what the outlet is, there's this real push for just content generation and constantly changing and constantly turning over. There's they'll let go really phenomenally talented people for reasons that I don't understand. I guess money, I don't know. I mean,
it's all money. No,
the rates that I'm seeing for things are just astonishing.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch on that. I know we're talking about,
for sure.
And so on, but this has been an issue that I've thought about for the past forever, and especially coming off of all the actors and writers strikes and all this stuff about unionization and pay and everything. I had pitched an idea for something. It was sort of based on content that was already out there and people were interested in. And the quotes that I was getting wouldn't pay for a month of medication. And I had to say no. And, I felt terrible about it because I had another writer who was going to be involved in it. And I really wanted to bring it all together,
Yeah.
but I just couldn't do it for $275. Like, it was going to be a full interview, the whole thing. And I keep thinking, I mean, these were publications who supposedly champion writers, and they do, but like, I be, as much as I'm kicking myself for not, writing for $275, I would have been angry the whole time. So
Well,
I think,
that, right?
yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
if you're thinking about this, if you're sitting at home and you're thinking about this, like, oh, who wouldn't take $275 for an article? Think about how much work and how much time and how many
so
weeks go into researching,
yeah,
writing, rewriting.
fact check, interview scheduling, transcription, all of it. I mean, the transcription, but yeah, I mean, for too
Like,
long,
at
like,
the end of that, what are you making an hour? Like $3?
I
Oh,
mean, yeah.
I'm gonna do some really intense real talk here. I graduated in 96, so I graduated a decade before you.
Mhm.
At a time when no one was taking any feminist inflected articles at
Yeah, that's
all.
true.
So I had to write basically for $10 a piece, which I almost never even cashed the checks because I considered it a donation at that point for
Right.
at that point, the then longest publishing independent feminist newspaper, Sojourner, the Women's Forum. I had my
Mhm.
first watch column, which I didn't even think I was getting a column. I wrote one piece, I pitched one piece for them. They liked it so much they offered me a column, and I was young. I was just out of college. So I said, yes, I would love that
Yeah,
on my weekends as like a build my portfolio thing. And that
for
was
sure.
my grad school, was teaching myself how to do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But um, I mean, by the late 90s, early 2000s, I think I got about $1 a word from Ms. Magazine in 2000.
Hmm.
And then I never got more than $1 a word. And then I started getting, and then I got $1 a word. By the time I got $1 a word again for the Village Voice, which, Sojourner is gone, Bitch is gone, Ms. is still there, but the Village Voice, the longest publishing original alt weekly
Mhm.
newspaper, gone.
Yeah.
They finally came back, but it's a shell of its former self under
Yeah.
new
I didn't even know that. Wow.
um,
They tried to
Well,
come back.
it
but
really these media empires too, right? Like
right.
Breitbart's got this big chunk of media. Pamplin Media's got a big chunk.
But with I just want to finish the end of this
Yeah,
is
sorry.
the Village Voice. No, that's okay. This is a Village Voice was giving me $1 a word in the mid late 2010s, and then their print publication folded,
Right.
and they were asking me for the same length of pieces that would take me 2 weeks to do, that they used to give me $2,000 for, that now they wanted for $200
Yeah.
because it was only
Yeah.
online. Right. And I never, like, journalism is the only, I've been saying this since before. Currently, we have this glut of pieces in the last 6 months about how media are facing an extinction level event. But I've been
Mhm.
saying for years, because one of my beats has been media economics as a media critic, and a media activist. But I've been saying for years that journalism is the only industry that I can possibly think of where, in addition to it not adjusting for inflation, rates have gone down by around 80%, 90%.
Disgusting.
The fact that I was getting $1 a word in 2000, and then I was regularly asked, after getting 20 years more experience and more platform, I was being asked to write for like 80% less,
Yeah.
90%
That's exactly
less.
it. And
It's, yeah.
after the recession, I mean, it was so insane. I was really, really young. I was like 22. And so this was an all weekly. I went from pre-recession where they paid for my ticket. I was living in New York, and so I flew out there. They paid for that. They paid for me to go to surf camp. They paid for me to write the article about going to surf camp. They paid for like a couple days at a hotel. By the time '08 came around, the pay was cut in half, like for features and for cover stories. I mean, it was scary, and I didn't see it coming because what the hell did I know? And no one really saw it coming, I guess. And it's not stabilized since, and it's just so insulting and mind-boggling what we are basically told that we have to accept because that's the way it is. And it's like, it's to the point where I'm like, if you guys are paying, like, if this is the rate, get out of the business. I mean, you're going to get people to do it because people are going to do it. You're always going to find someone to do it. You know, if I wasn't like, I was working full time up until recently. And so, you know, if I was still doing the full time thing, working for $275 looks a lot different.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if it was something where whatever it was going to get me way further along than, you know what I'm saying? Like,
This is
and
something I want to highlight. I want to put a pin in what you're saying for just a second,
sure.
because this is something that we talk about a lot at Yeah Right. When we say, guys, when we say don't work for free, when we say don't work for cheap, please don't. We're undercutting each other.
Yes.
If they can find someone to do it for 2 cents a word, they will. If
Yeah.
none of us will do it for 2 cents a word, they won't.
And
Yeah.
here's the thing, here's why.
If you can afford to do it for 2 cents a word, you can afford to not do it for 2 cents a word too.
Yeah.
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 And here's the bigger picture around media economics. Media consolidation started, well, there's been consolidation consistently, but I pin a lot of it on the Telecom Act of 1996 under Bill Clinton, which started the big wave of consolidation. And then ever since, there's been more and more deregulation by
Bertelsmann.
by the industry controlled and highly lobbied FCC. And now to at this point, most media corporations, maybe not most, many of the top level news corporations, especially print news corporations, are either owned directly by or owned by companies leveraged by venture capital and Silicon Valley and like Alden Capital and et cetera. So their business is not actually news. Their
Yes.
business is
Is
not
money.
actually journalism. Their business is buy up these newspapers, buy up these magazines to strip them for parts, consolidate a variety of newsrooms, create ghost papers where you're putting together news with one person, two people in a newsroom, but you're doing the layout, you're syndicating one article all over the place. You're getting rid of local news. You're doing layouts many states away. And you're keeping the original names. So people who are average readers don't even know that it's not local news anymore, other than they know that they're not getting coverage of their communities. And the goal is for them to make profit off of what's left. But that's why you're saying, like, why are the greatest journalists being cut? They're being cut because Alden Global Capital doesn't give a shit about
don't care at all.
journalism, right?
And this is where capitalism and journalism really clash. I mean, do they clash in pretty much every, but like this is very specific, I think, of like, and this was something that I was going to touch on earlier because I was thinking back of like how the pitching landscape changes. It used to be that if I pitched something that someone thought was too promotional, this was back in like the early days of it when I was doing it, they wouldn't take it. Now, if it's not promotional enough, if it doesn't tie into something immediate, they don't know what to do with it. They can love it and want to do it, but there's no, and it's like,
What ad do I attach to that?
yeah,
I
it's,
addressed that a
I
lot in
want
the
to I
novel,
want to
actually.
pause us. I love what we're talking about, but we have been saying pitch this, when I pitch, what I pitched, and we haven't talked a lot about what a pitch is, what that process looks like. And I know when I was first getting into the industry, I would like be talking, I would be in Jennifer, you and I were in a number of the same Facebook groups together for sure. And I would be talking about an idea and somebody would be like, "Oh yeah, you should pitch that." And I'd be like, "Yeah, I will do that." What the fuck are you talking about?
pitching is so intimidating, especially if you're cold pitching, like it still gives me hives basically.
Like, what
But
even is a pitch? If I have to define a pitch, I would say, I think approaching someone with an idea for an article or a story that I haven't written yet that I think would be great to do and convincing them that they want to buy it without having read it.
it's the short sell of the most compelling stuff told like you're log lining a movie. I mean, if you can get the hook of it in that first, I mean, the funny thing is like, so when I pitch new places, I haven't been doing that right now, but like when I pitch new places, I'm always like, okay, is this going to sound a little cheesy? And the crazy thing is, depending on where you pitch, sometimes if you hit the right cheese factor almost, they like it more, which is kind of weird, but it's like
How do
the,
I charm this person I don't know?
right, exactly. It's like as soon as Leland Thompson got off the bus in Wyoming, he knew he'd made a huge mistake, like that kind, whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
some of it echoes what your first opening line of the piece may be, maybe not, but like the chronological order, build up the tension. I mean, it's really like it's the finessed version of, hey man, this thing is really crazy and it happened and it was on I-90 and there were like all these guys, like the clean version of that where it's like gets to the point, makes it compelling. Another thing that's helpful in a pitch is if you have the inside track on something, like if if this is happening down the street from your house at the local bodega owner is doing XYZ thing, like if it's something where you can get in or you've talked to or you've seen this story crop up in a Facebook group before, you know what I'm saying? Like any of that sort of leading up with that. There's a thing I've seen recently where people are saying before you pitch, you should have about 30% of the research or the article done.
I've seen that for many, many, many years. I don't like it, but
I don't
I've
either.
seen it for a long, I don't like it. And
Yeah.
for me,
Me
I
I
think
do,
it depends on the person though, right? Like a lot of people need to do 30% of the research to know if there's a story there
Right, for sure, for
that can
sure.
be told.
it,
I
it
feel like
helps.
you have a
I'm
better
sorry.
sense for it.
I think it also depends on if you have a pre-existing relationship with an editor or not.
Yeah.
I think that there are a couple things I want to say about pitching. One,
Mhm.
don't one of the things I mean, this is if you'll indulge me to go back a couple decades at this point. One of the things that that I used to do when I founded a group called Women in Media and News in 2001, and one of our projects was to increase women's representation in news, because at that time women were like 7, 8, 9% of the talking heads on TV news, and like less than 10 or so percent. I don't remember the exact numbers, but more than, about 20, 25 years ago, like around 10 or less percent of op-eds were written by women. And and when I would do media advocacy, talking with people on the New York Times editorial board, for example, or people who ran, like the producers of NBC Meet the Press or ABC Face the Nation, they would tell me that it was just that women weren't good writers, or women didn't pitch enough, or women didn't, et cetera. There weren't enough qualified women, except that what they were ignoring was
Binders full of qualified women.
women did pitch, and B, they often took the if there was a woman who was in charge of a Senate committee, they would book the man to write the op-ed or be on TV who was the subcommittee chair. Not
That's so
right.
dumb.
But the thing with the pitches was the thing they would never address, that I was like, I'm not new. I know how this works.
Right.
Most newspapers, most magazines, most TV bookings, they don't only rely on pitches. They editors solicit, right?
Mhm.
So when you're cold pitching, you not only have to get over the hump of convincing the editor to run your story and work with a new person and et cetera, you also have to get over the hump of all the other people they're soliciting from, because they already have an idea of who they have a relationship with, who can give them clean copy, et cetera. And if they're
Anyway.
dudes, right?
Yeah.
Who they already know and like. But the pitch itself, it was standard for a very long time. Like your pitch should include a good percentage of who your sources are going to be, what your lead is, what your top 3 bullet points of that you want your readers to take away, like what are your main points, which one of the reasons women didn't always pitch as much is women don't have time to do half the research for a story and do half the story if you don't know you're going to be paid for the story.
Right. Yeah.
So
I was saying that's not just a gendered problem, that it's also an economic problem. And I want to front for everybody that when we're talking about pitching, when we're talking about this, we are talking about it as 3 white or white presenting people operating in the industry, and your mileage may vary depending on location, depending on your various axes of marginalization, depending on who you're pitching to, on the market that you're pitching to. So, you know,
Yes.
we're not trying to say like this is going to be a universal experience or this has been a
Yeah.
universal experience, because a Black woman in my position is going to have a very different pitching
Absolutely.
experience than I do.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. One thing that I've always this is a very rare conversation for me because I almost never do in person. I never ever do a panel where it's only white people. I've made that commitment for a very, very long time, and I almost never do them online either. But I made an exception this time.
I
But
appreciate it. Thank you.
okay, but it is true, and it's very important to remember that if you want to be successful in journalism, you have to get good at pitching. B, you have to get just as good or better at relationship building with editors, which is harder now that as you've said,
Yep.
there's so much turnover, so many editors are left. I have
It's
that
so much
problem.
virtual, no one has time, blah, blah, blah.
Whole
And
newsrooms of editors are being let go. Looking at you, New York Times.
right. So in addition to getting good at pitching and building relationships with editors who then don't exist, and then the outlets don't even exist anymore, which is my big issue.
Yeah.
And the last piece that no one talks about is that your identity and the topics that you cover affect how your pitch is received and how those relationships are built.
Absolutely.
You know, an example, I started, and this is an example I've talked about a lot, but I started discussing, the first time I pitched a story on gendered motivations behind mass shootings was 1998.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a Jonesboro school shooting. It was before Columbine. No one had ever had this in America. They'd had it in Canada before.
Oh, wow.
Two boys went to their middle school, took a gun, sent all the boys out of the class, killed only girls and their female teacher. And at the time, we hadn't seen this before, and all of the media coverage was, what could possibly have made this happen? It must be violent video games. What could possibly made this happen? Racist coded rap music and gangster rap, and also urban communities are breaking down, urban families are break down, whatever, essentially blaming Black people. And I pitched a story about the fact that in almost all the coverage, it ignored this one thing, that one article had quoted the boy as saying, like, no girl's gonna break up with
Right,
me.
they literally said it.
Literally said it. And I was talking about how if we didn't, as journalists, as media, if we didn't cover the actual motivation, the gendered motive, all the people killed were female. The kid was mad at a girl for breaking up with him. If we didn't talk about the gendered motivation, people would not understand the warning signs, and this stuff would happen again, and media would be completely. And then I pitched that everywhere. No one wanted it. I was told that I was hysterical. I was told that this was some feminazi claptrap, etc. And also, I was also just ignored with no response at all, depending on whether it was New York Times or Newsweek or whatever. Yeah. And so I wrote it for Sojourner, that at the time, feminist newspaper. And then for about 16 years, I had to write some version of that same story every time it happened again, until the feminist blogosphere built enough power where we echoed each other. People started echoing what I was writing, and they were writing their own things. And then the term toxic masculinity became a thing. And then eventually, when Glamour hired Jill Filipovic away from her blog, and the New York Times hired Anna Holmes from Jezebel, and like all these people who had built power in the feminist blogosphere started online on the online side of mainstream news outlets. Then there was enough sort of a wellspring around this topic. And then finally, Melissa Harris Perry had her TV show on MSNBC when Elliot Rodger had his big manifesto about killing all the women in Santa Barbara, California, before he killed himself. And I went on at Melissa Harris Perry's show, and I had been talking about how media needed to call this gender-based terrorism for 15 years. And finally, I mean, my own headline that I wrote in 98 was Jonesboro, sexism kills girls. And by the time, it was only having the first Black feminist news host on cable news. And it was only after, 10 years of feminist building power in the blogosphere that we finally had a real discussion in corporate TV news about gender-based violence behind school shooting. What I'm saying is, like, the pitch, I could have had the best pitch in the world in 98.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. No one
Doesn't matter.
The men in charge considered that pitch irrelevant until there was enough of a community and the culture had shifted enough, right?
Right. And so we end up with white people writing brown
Right.
refugee stories, and we end up with cis people writing trans rights stories. Like, and this is part of the problem. Like, if you pitch something that is integral to your identity, that is an own voices story, you may not get the reception that you should be getting.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how to tell you to overcome that, because that's bullshit.
Yeah, there's, and it is hard. That's a really tough one. What you guys both brought up. I mean, that's so, it's so hard to separate, because it's one of those things, like, you never really know. Is it like, is this just not a quote unquote good story? Like, I did all the
Right.
things that I'm
Is
quote
it
unquote
me? Is
supposed
it my
to do.
story? Is
it my writing? And it could be, yeah, but there's also, if you think about what the layers of the story are, and it doesn't matter, like, I don't write a ton about being I guess I do write a bunch about being non-binary, but but with this happens in fiction too, where you have what they're calling an own voices story, and there's resistance because it's not what what the people who don't have any experience being this thing, whatever it is,
right.
they have all these ideas about what it should be.
Authenticity
And they don't
and
always
gatekeeping,
communicate that because they don't even realize it, I think. And it's, it happens at all stages of it. I had an agent, I did rewrites for this person on this piece. It was fiction, and um when I sent them back, the note that came back, sort of the reason for rejection was, the trans character, everyone starts calling him by his chosen name too easily. It didn't happen that way when mine wasn't. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I am an entire trans person writing this. Like, kids pick this stuff up quickly, a lot of them. Like, like, it was just wild. It's just wild.
It's like all the gay stories have to be coming out stories, and all the Black stories
Yeah, or
have to be slavery stories.
there has to be, if it's a YA, like, there has to be this redeeming adult who doesn't have any flaws and doesn't screw up the main character at all, even though that's not.
Yeah, no, there's going to be one perfect adult, and it's going to be outside the home, and their parents are going to react badly, but, like, maybe the parents will come around after the redeeming adult has a talk with them,
the kid
or
has to
there's an
act
ultimatum.
perfect and saintly. They can't fight back against whatever people
Right, they can't just be a shitty teenager. Like, there has to be space in our stories for people to be mediocre.
To people being horrible about, like, who they just are and can't control.
That what you're talking about reminds me very much. I mean, I think that this is true both in fiction and in nonfiction media. I think the reason that the movie American Fiction did so well, and Cord Jefferson did so well with that film, is because that it touches on. I mean, there have been some critiques of American Fiction, but it definitely touches on that issue.
But they changed the name. That was Percival Everett's Erasure. I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, wait a minute, I know this story. And then I wondered at why did he not sign off on it? I don't know. Or just did they, because that's a great title. Erasure is it gets to the point a little bit too much maybe for Hollywood, but I always wondered. Anyway, that's an aside about that particular, because I love Percival Everett so much.
This actually ties into a question that I get asked, and that I wanted to make sure that we covered, which is what can the outlet change in your work once you've pitched, once you've submitted, as you've handed things over? Is it all fair game? Can they change your title? Can they change your words? At what point? And can you say stop?
Yeah, you can. I mean, do you mind if I grab this really quick? Because this was top of mind of me for something, because this is also the same thing in fiction. So
Yeah.
writers have a bad reputation. You know, I grew up, you know, at the dinner table with an editor and for a short time with a writer, but the reputation of writers is terrible, that they're difficult to work with, that, you know, they hold fast to stupid things, and that's all true. But you can also go the opposite way, wanting to be like the cool writer, the accommodating writer who isn't going to be like, you know what, really, please don't change that. I feel strongly about it. And so it is a balancing act of like what comes back on that first edit of your first draft. That's when you're going to know how heavy-handed they're going to be, or, you know, there are times when they don't edit at all, and it's like, okay. But, you know, even
That's such a nerve-wracking space, right? Like you get something back from your editor, and
yeah.
I always feel two ways. One is like there's red pen all over it, and I'm like, how dare you? And then it comes back and it's clean, and I'm like, did you even read this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I see big changes, I do have that pit of my stomach, like, but then it's like, thank God you've saved me, because like you can't editing your own work in the immediacy after it, like there's no getting quote unquote good at it in the way you would need to be if you were an editor editing somebody else's. Like there's no way to, you'd have to knock yourself in the head with a frying pan or something like that and then read your thing again. I don't know,
No,
but
I had a professor who recommended being real drunk,
that'll do it.
and I'm not gonna suggest that anyone alter their bodily chemistry to edit their work. Stephen King, I think, suggested putting it away for a week and watching trash media and then coming back to
He's
it.
brilliant,
But
I
you may
have
not
to say.
have a week.
yeah,
Yeah.
He's certainly made his share of missteps, but I love his advice on writing.
He's very plain words about it.
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I agree with the putting it down. But I actually find that if I put it down for a few days, if I have a few days, which I don't always, but if I do, I am just as brutal with my own work as I am with others. To maybe a 10% less. Like I can be brutal with my work, but it is certainly easier to do with others, but it
Oh
just
yeah.
takes me longer to get it across but I can be brutal with my work. In terms of the what you get back though, it is, I agree with you that it's a balancing act. For me, it's always about choosing your battles.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
always find that there's more that I want to push back on than I feel is appropriate to push back on, because you know that it's like any transaction.
Right. If you reject all their changes, you're going to have no credibility on the ones you need to fight for.
And
Right.
there are probably some good changes in there.
Oh, right. No, for sure. Right. But like,
Yeah.
even let's say you happen to come across one of the bad editors. Because if it's a good editor, we don't need to talk about it because they've made great changes, right? And if it's an okay editor, they've made some good ones and some bad ones. Let's say you've gotten an editor who's just overworked and tired. Maybe they're not bad at what they do, but they're in a be generous, and they're in a bad
mood. It kind of
mood.
doesn't matter. The effect is the same, you know?
Right, exactly. So you get back.
Right. So you have a mixed bag of edits. Let's just let our judgment of the editor go, guys. You get a mixed bag of edits.
Right. You've got a mixed bag of edits, and some of them are, and like you just look at them and you're like, most of these are trash. And I'm really wed to, let's say there are like 12 edits, and some of them are big and some of them are small, and you're wed to all of them. Then it's a balancing act of what is going to affect the piece the most. Then it's about, okay, what can I live with the most that's going to annoy me the least when I look back at this? What is going to, are any of these edits going to fundamentally change either the experience of reading it, or more importantly, maybe the factual or analytical approach of the piece? And then it's about, okay, can I ask for 25% of this to be kept? Can I ask for 50% of this to be kept? And how much do I argue about it? Do I say it's just a half a phrase, or do I explain in a paragraph why it needs to be kept?
Right.
About a relationship.
I'm going to add to that. There's also, and I'm sure both of you have had this experience of when you come across an edit that's ridiculous or just sort of weirdly like, yeah, see that face.
Yeah.
So I once wrote, I think it was a piece about like, I was talking about my dad, and I described him as sort of like going like this or something like that. He's
right, yeah.
and it was actually the exact motion that he did. And the edit that I got back, and I can't for the life of me remember what this was for, but the edit was that this description of what he did was too feminine. I'm like, the man literally did what I just freaking said. And also, what does that even mean? And
Like, this
also,
is nonfiction.
who cares if it is? Which it
Yeah.
isn't, but like, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, those things I will always push back on because it's just, I can't not, because it's ridiculous. And, you know, this editor is maybe, you know, if I don't check them on that, they're going to go do it to someone else and who's just gonna be like, well, okay, you know, and maybe next time they go to do that, maybe their lizard brain will remember, hey, someone really didn't like this. They brought up that this was really ridiculous of me. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
That's another thing that you can do when you are somebody with an ongoing relationship with an editor
Right.
or with a power relationship with a
Right.
market, is push on those edits that you know are going to make life easier for other writers behind you. Black hair descriptions, off the top of my head.
Not
in my
putting people's skin color as food. Don't do it. Just don't
in my
describe people like food.
in my first book, I had to argue really hard to capitalize the B in Black.
Mhm.
I had to go to the mat on that. And it was with a feminist press. I was so dismayed that I had to go to the mat on that, but I did. Currently, with the current book that I'm working, the graphic novel, I have a good editor.
Mhm.
But a lot of it has to do with space. The space constraints of a graphic novel
Right.
are beyond. And so sometimes things have to be cut, but because I'm an issue area expert in a nonfiction educational thing, and nobody I'm working with on the project understands that topic the way with the granular
Yeah.
nature to be understood, which is
They
not
haven't had to. You do.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I've had to push back here and there on like, but this is why this has to be said this way, otherwise it's inaccurate, right? And
Yeah.
most of the time she'll be like, oh, okay, well then, I mean, look, it has to be cut. It shortens. If you can find a different way to say it that's also accurate, great, but you have to figure out how to do it. Like, there are
Right.
times where, I mean, I've definitely had to choose my battles because
Mhm.
because of the space thing with this whole project. I've had to choose my battles. I like that I respect that she is willing to let me, she's not draconian about it. She's
Yeah.
willing to do the give and take. There are some editors who are very draconian. I've certainly worked with my share of those. What I sometimes get frustrated about is I like to use humor in my writing, even because a lot of what I write is very dark. A lot, like I'm dealing with human rights abuses. I'm dealing with violence. I'm dealing with,
Right.
always media coverage of these horrible things, right? And so I like to try to provide some humor where it's possible. And sometimes,
Right. And it strengthens the impact, right?
right,
Like, if you end up with writing all one tone, like, I've had to push back on editors who are like, I'm going to take out this and this. And I'm like, but then the writing becomes flat. You have to leave one of these in or take one of these out.
yes, and with stuff where it's like if you take out the humor or you take out the prose style, then it just reads like medicine. And
Mhm.
the reason that it's compelling that people want to read something is not to feel bashed over the head with some terrible stuff. They want to feel like they're learning but also engaged and right. And so sometimes the easiest thing to take out for space is a joke. And it's like, yeah, but this is
But
where I
is
go
it a
back to
joke?
like,
It's telling
not
a
a joke,
story.
but
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I know what you mean, but like the easiest thing to do would be to take out something that seems quote unquote light, but it, it really kind of isn't at the same time.
Right,
And
right.
it's that dry, they try to couch it as like, let's make this quote unquote evergreen. And it's like, come on,
Let's
like,
tighten this.
yeah,
Right.
tight, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I mean, as I've done editing, you do need to
Tighten.
tighten
You do need
sometimes.
to
Oh, hell
tighten,
yeah.
but
I have the most sympathy for editors that need to tighten, especially like people will thank me for clean copy, but I also know I know my strengths, but I know my weaknesses. I write long. I do.
Me too.
And
Yeah.
it's part of why I'm so good at both as an editor and as a writer. Going back, it'll take me fucking forever, but I will use a scalpel and take as long as I can to cut 500 words from an entire piece as opposed to one paragraph,
I
right?
think that writers who are also edited or have spent a lot of time being edited are saner. I mean, to work with, maybe
You
not
find
internally,
more-
I should say.
No, but you do find more stuff in your stuff, right? If you're used to
Yeah.
looking for patterns in other people's writing, suddenly you notice, oh, I use the word grin all the time.
You also know what the person is trying to do, and it's like, and it's always hard when you're when you're editing someone you've never edited before. You're like, okay, is this person gonna freak out? Like being edited is a skill, which I think
Yes.
gets lost. Like
I
being
have a
edited
writer I work with
skill.
who we do not love each other.
Yeah, I mean,
and we're not going to
learning to
love
take
each
it on
other.
the chin, but also not to be a pushover, how to be clear and, feel your feelings, but also not let them dictate because
Mhm.
I mean, but at the same time, don't discount them because they're telling you something.
But
Can
okay, so
I ask a question of either of you in
Yeah.
your writing?
always.
This is based on what you just said about like feel your feelings, but I'm
Mhm.
almost always able to do that. The only time I can't is when I find an edit that is that makes something where I've been very clear about a factual thing and they don't understand it, even though
Yes.
I've given it to many
Ah!
other
Oh,
people. And
so angry.
And they
then
take it out and you're like, but now this doesn't make sense.
or they want to change
You
it to
needed this to
something
understand
inaccurate.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm
or like,
am I being edited by a fucking toddler? What the fuck is
or
this?
it's
I've
just
given readers beforehand. Everybody says it's clear. Plus, I'm the one who's funny about these things. Like, how
or it makes you feel like you're taking crazy pills because it's like,
okay, it's not just me.
no,
Not just
no,
you.
it's like they'll say
Oh.
the editor will say something, and these are great editors do this too. They'll say, "Well, but you just described it's a spiral staircase. You don't have to say that he's sort of whatever." But the idea is this spiral staircase is making him dizzy. You have to say both things because if you don't say one, you know what I'm saying? And it's like you lose so much of what's happening,
Yeah,
It
like
makes it small, but like,
flavor text
yeah.
matters.
We
There's a
have to know
reason
that
that we
he's
don't just eat
dizzy when he
matzah.
walks into the kitchen. We can't just know he went down the spiral staircase. I mean, it won't make sense that he drops the knife on his toe if he's like not dizzy from the you know what I'm saying? Like I'm making this up obviously, but just stuff where
Yeah.
it's like, I get you're trying to save space. I get you think this is redundant, but it's not. How do you not see that?
And for me, because it's nonfiction, it's to me that the anger comes in where it's like, if I do the thing that you've said, I have painted an inaccurate picture of this thing.
That
Or
we want it to be more dramatic, and it's like it doesn't have to be more dramatic. It is a dramatic thing, whatever this thing is,
Right,
like
he dropped the knife on his foot. Like that's dramatic.
yeah, like you don't, I was writing a thing about, and I get it. A lot of it comes back to what you'd said about you have 3 sentences to get someone, and that's where all that is coming from, especially because these are long form things I'm talking about. But it's like I had an opener where a guy is alone in his art gallery, and someone calls him and threatens to, if you don't leave my wife alone, I'm going to kill you. And meanwhile, the guy hasn't. It's a story. The story is
I love
about
that
taking
story.
identity anyway. But like, you don't need to punch that up. This is a guy who's like having a nice afternoon in Palm Springs, and he picks up his phone, and some guy says, "I'm going to slit your throat." Like that's drama enough.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
My field is I work primarily in nonfiction right now in criminal legal system reform for the US, and it is absolutely critical that laws are described accurately. It is absolutely critical that a weapon is described accurately, or that we don't just say this affects POC
Right.
when we're talking about disparate racial impact, because Black and Indigenous people are going to feel this differently from East Asian descended people are going to feel it differently from South Asian, from Central American Indigenous, from Latina people. It's you can't just say, and the other thing that happens a lot is that they will throw in uh uh women and LGBTQ people. And I'm like,
Sort
we're
of, but
talking about
yeah.
incarceration in women's prisons. So, okay, great. But you can't just say, and LGBTQ people, like, are we talking about trans women who are incarcerated in men's prisons? Are we talking
Right.
about trans men
Trans
who are
women who are in
incarcerated?
women's prisons or
That
what,
fits
yeah.
because
So you have to be like specific. You can't
Yeah.
just be and, because this is a breadth of people with a breadth of, and you can't just chuck that in as though it was gonna like fix your diversity problem in this writing that you didn't study these people.
Right, yes. Specificity matters and also research matters.
Yeah.
And the intent of the writer in the first place to get this right and be inclusive, not just because you're trying to click off a laundry list, but because you care about the impact across the board on a variety of communities. And that's the difference. I feel like this is something that I've as a media activist early on, here's an example. When we were forming our Women in Media and News, which was the group that I founded in the early 2000s, I took almost a full year extra to launch our blog. We launched we had the first group blog on media, women's group blog on media, or feminist group blog on media criticism on the internet. And it took me a year longer to launch than I could have launched right away if I just got the women who I happen to know who did, because the goal was basically it was women media, and so it was a variety of different categories: women media and science, women media and sports, women media and economics. My goal was every issue is a women's issue if you look at it through that lens. Every issue, like, it's not just pay disparity and rape. Every women are invested because women are human in every socioeconomic and
Women are
political.
human. Since when are they human? Oh no.
What?
Yeah, right. So the goal was to get issue area experts who also knew how to write about media. And that was a really hard thing to get because
Yeah.
I mean, think about 2001, 2002. There are so few people doing media criticism, no less feminist media criticism, no less intersectional, anti-racist feminist media
If it's
criticism.
media criticism, it's about media that's, not emerging media, whatever that meant.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what I decided was it was more important to me to have a diverse roster. I wanted to launch with at least 25% women of color, if not more. And I launched with about 30% women of color. But it took me a year to find the roster of people because and in order to do that, originally I thought I was just going to find journalists and media critics. And what I realized was, no, I'll find somebody who's an expert in sports who I can mentor into learning how to do media criticism better, right? That sort of thing. So
And
in
like
order to find the right people.
this was early days internet. Now, I see people complaining about, oh, I wanted to cast or I wanted to hire, but no one applied. It's like, then you're doing something.
You're doing
There's
something
an
if you
entire
don't have
internet
those
of people
voices.
waiting for you to find them. Like, it's
Yeah,
not hard,
this is not a new problem, and it's not a new dodge for the answer, right? Like this is the problem they've had. I mean, this is what the New York Times told me when I was trying to get women on the op-ed pages or as A-section sources in 2001, 2003. Oh, there are just no women who are qualified. Yeah, there are. There are no people of color qualified. Yeah, there are. And
so many.
The problem is that there aren't people from a demographic who are qualified. The problem isn't that there aren't people from a demographic who are available. The problem is, what is your organization doing that they don't want to work for you?
Yeah.
Or
what is your
what are you
organization doing to
willfully
make them welcome
ignoring to not
safe?
hire, like, where are you not looking? Like,
And
there are so many directories now, whether it's like a social media thing or like Staff Me Up, or, there's people putting together like job pools specifically looking at historically Black colleges. Like, it's not hard.
yeah.
It's not.
Folks,
And
these are
that-
also good
yeah.
places to find your sensitivity readers. If you need a sensitivity reader or a subject matter expert, they are out there. Don't make the excuse, oh, I was going to pitch this story about this, or I was going to write this story about that, but I couldn't find someone. Someone is out there.
Yeah.
Someone is out there and you can pay them to read your shit.
Yeah.
I promise you.
Or trade. A lot of times I find like writers are like, hey, I'm looking for, they'll read yours, you'll read theirs. If they like your stuff, you like their stuff. It works out that way too.
Shameless plug, yeah, right, has a Discord. We have an open marketplace for trading reading if folks want to get on that. We'll see you there. Folks, we are almost over time. I'm so excited. I know everybody was worried that we wouldn't have enough stuff to talk about.
Oh, I could go on forever. This is,
Um,
yeah, I'm pretty confident that we both could.
But
Yeah.
is there anything that you want to leave folks with in terms of like, oh, you know, this is you know, one simple trick.
Yes.
What's in my cover letter in my pitch? What's in my this? Go for it, RF.
Do it anyway. I mean, that's because like there are a million impediments to writing, whether or not they're imagined or real, it kind of doesn't matter. You know, you see, especially now in the age of social media, you see all these people going to these fancy writers' retreats and they're, you know, they've got their computer set up at an idyllic desk with a cup of coffee and like a robin's nest with the whatever the hell it is. And I always come back to there's a scene in All the President's Men where Dustin Hoffman is in his terrible studio apartment. His desk is overflowing. He's got like a little shot glass filled with whiskey and cigarette butts. He's sitting there in his BVDs with his typewriter at like 1 a.m. by himself. That's writing. Like if you can write on the train, do it. If you can write while you're waiting for the bus or picking up your kids or whatever, like it doesn't have to be pretty. Sometimes that's even better if it isn't. And you know, you come up with a pitch, you think it, you know, you've done all the things you can do and you're terrified of, oh God, do it anyway. Just do it. Like the worst they're going to say is no. You know I have this enduring image of like an intern's computer and it's like a screen the size of the Empire State Building and it's just pitch emails that someone's deleting. You know, do it I mean, who cares? It's just do it. Like
Yeah, and if you're one of the people who says, well, I need a big block of time to write comfortably, you probably do, but you know what you can do on the bus? You can come up with your hook.
or your
Right.
outline or some
Your pitch. You can come up with
or
one
something.
sentence. Text yourself the one sentence that's going to be the
I write
lead.
in Google Keep because it keeps the pressure off. I mean, I have these weird, everyone has their weird writing rituals, whether it's a favorite brand of pen or a time of day or like a system. Yep. I have to write in Google Keep first, Google Docs, like too much pressure. As much pressure as I can take off of myself, I will do.
I used to write in Evernote.
I unblurred just in solidarity with what you're saying. This is my desk.
Yep.
Like, this is my
Yeah.
with my messy desk with my drafts of the graphic novel.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, you know, everything is everywhere. You know, I think you're right. Like, do it anyway. And then I guess I would also say, to touch back on something I said before, it's a balance. I think it can be, especially for emerging writers, especially for women and people of color, especially for other people with marginalized identities who get basically a fucking short shrift and get regularly shafted by power holders in corporate media. It can be really easy to blame ourselves for pitches being rejected. And I think that one way to get around that is to I mean, now I'm going to sound biased, but I do media literacy education. I do media literacy writing for a reason. I believe it very passionately. We all need to be media literate, both to help us become active citizens and to help us be less harmed by media. But also when it comes to creating media, I don't think you can create media well without being media literate yourself. So you need to understand the media economics piece, and you need to understand the power behind who gets to make these kinds of decisions. Because sometimes, as I said, you can write the perfect pitch. When I used to do workshops around strategic communications and how to write press releases and how to do talking points and all of this, how to get press. And one thing that I always said was I had a bit of a pushback, but there was another organization that was focused on helping women write op-eds. And their thing was, here's how you do it. And if you do it this way, you're going to get published, essentially. And they were great. Their tips were great. But I thought that what that eventually did, without the power analysis, it allowed people to internalize a lot of really unfortunate baggage. And so what I said is, you can do the perfect thing 99% of the time, and if you happen to be pitching a sexist or a racist, your piece might get rejected for no reason other than that. But the way you can do it anyway is make sure you have other journalists you can send your pitch to first. See what other people in the field say. Is this a strong pitch? Are there things you could strengthen? Make sure that you have the best foot forward that you can have, and then try to find who are the people behind the scenes who would be more open to that pitch. Don't try to start with the Times. Don't try to start with the biggest outlets. Start with an outlet that you have seen do something similar to this in the past. Build relationships with individuals or with outlets that are more likely to be open to your work.
And see if you can fill a gap. Like if there's a local paper that isn't covering basketball and you have the inside scoop on like all the recreational basketball stuff that's going on, and maybe it's super compelling for whatever reason. I mean, that's a good way in too. I mean, the thing is, and no one likes to hear this, but I say it all the time, talent is about 25% of this. And a lot of it's going to be time and place. I mean, you look at like this sort of emergence of viral media and how fast that goes. And if you think about, for every like successful viral whatever, there's like 70 million nearly identical things happening at the same time. Why that one gets it
Right.
is
Why is
kind
this
of
the
anyone.
emu of the week on TikTok?
Right. Yeah, like it can be, I mean, people want to be able to say, oh, I can make you a viral video. I can predict these kinds of successes. Not really. And sometimes it comes down to someone pressed send first, or
Mhm.
maybe vampires are really in this year, or
And
um
also, if a lot of the viral stuff, I know people who work behind, like a lot of it is, if you have those relationships you've built, if you have a famous person who retweets something or reshares something or reblogs something or whatever,
Every now and then somebody will reshare something
that's
of mine and like,
the main thing. If you have somebody with a large platform who shares your thing, that's gonna do as much as anything else
yeah.
to make it take off.
and
Yeah,
make relationships. I keep saying it to folks. Writers are just people.
yeah.
They're just people. Neil Gaiman is on Tumblr all the time. He is talking back to people all the time. It's fine. He's huge. John Scalzi is everywhere. Uh, Will Wheaton is everywhere. I'm picking fiction writers because these are the people that I know. Nora Jemisin is everywhere. People are having conversations. They're just people too. Like, if you're not a weird, creepy fan writing RPF about them, please don't write RPF.
Oh God. Oh God. So can I haven't dealt with that for me, but my mother was a writer, and it's such a mind fuck when that happens, when there's sort of, it's really scary, especially because, to add to it, she's been dead for like 31 years. And so years ago, this was right when I started as a journalist,
Mhm.
I was reading something that seemed like it was written by somebody who knew her. And I was reading,
Yeah,
and then there was like stuff that was just not, like, there was something really weird that the two of us had shared, like Nilla wafers, when my mother would never have done that. Like, I hadn't
yeah,
even tasted a Nilla wafer until I was in college, and it was sort of like, what? It's very weird. Like, I mean,
yeah. Have
writers,
your parasocial relationships with the characters, guys. The
yeah, that's
characters.
easily
Right,
that. I mean,
right.
granted, if you have a real connection to a story, for whatever that connection is, writers love to hear about it. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know of any writer who doesn't want to know your book made change my life in this
Oh,
tangible way.
I
Yeah.
used to say that honestly, that was the way I got paid, because I was so poor. For real talk, I was so poor for so long because I sacrificed everything for what I considered my role in the movement around media activism and media literacy. And the work, when you were saying, Rowan, earlier, how much did you get paid an hour when it gets broken down for articles?
yeah,
My first book, I would have been way better. I mean, I got it in advance for my first book, and it was better than what you would imagine for a small feminist press, but it was still small.
Yeah.
And after the amount of work I put in, I would have been like easily considered way, way, way better to have just worked at McDonald's before the $15 an hour, like worked at McDonald's in
Yeah,
2008
yeah,
instead
Yeah.
of that book. I would have been better off financially, right? I
yeah,
was
yeah.
poor for a long time because of this. But when people would write to me and say, I have changed the way I create media because of this book. My book was called Reality Bites Back, and it was the first major book about reality television and functioning as gender and functioning as backlash against gender and race progress in America. And I published it in 2010. And a lot of the stuff that's been coming out in the last couple of years about a reckoning about reality TV is all that people are talking about as if it's new. It's all stuff I wrote about back then. But people telling me they changed the way they create media because of it, or they changed their academic course of study to then become media critics themselves because of it, or they stopped, they got treatment for an eating disorder because they read something that made them realize that they were influenced by media.
I stopped my mom from
That's
getting
like
scammed by a romance scammer after reading, or like I saw
Yeah.
your article in all these, women over 50 dating groups as warning, like those kinds of things. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really like
Yeah.
puts your piece.
Like, it's
What
I got
funny.
something on like a college curriculum once, and I was like, yeah, I need it.
I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, and I'm not going to because I have to go and actually deal with cat stuff.
Yeah.
I am also gonna go deal with cat stuff. It's
Cat stuff,
vet
lots of cat
afternoon
stuff.
here.
But
So
this has been, I mean, I haven't talked about writing this much, in a long time. And, the writer's strike was also a lot of talking about writing and bad contracts and things that like people usually look at you like you've got 19 heads. And so we're out here suffering along with the rest of you. So, say hi and say, hey, you know, it's a crazy world out there, and what the hell do I do? And maybe we can help you. Probably not.
right. Writers love to talk. Clearly, we'll
Yeah.
answer any questions.
Oh, yeah.
Even if we don't know the answer at all.
I'm not on Twitter anymore. I mean, I maintained my account so nobody can squat on it, but I'm not
X.
on it. I'm
Yeah.
on Blue Sky, even though I haven't been on it for a while. I'm on Instagram, even though I don't often go. And so yeah, so you can find me JENNPOZNER. Anytime you have a writing related question, a feminism or anti-racist activism question, specifically a media literacy question, happy to talk about any of it.
And hey, if anybody's looking for I'm flogging my business here. If anybody is in need of a private investigator, not just based in New York, depending on what the need is, um, I'm here.
Yeah.
Find me.
Plug yourselves, folks.
Good to know.
Um, definitely. This is plug yourself. You're gonna have to. This is your practice.
Yeah,
Pitch,
this is
pitch,
how,
pitch.
yeah, there's no publicity for writers anymore, so you gotta do it yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess in
Are
that case, the media literacy graphic novel will be forthcoming in 2025 from First Second Books. I hope the title will be It's Not You, It's Media, but that is still TK. It might be something else. And feel free to keep up with me on Blue Sky or Instagram.
Jen's links are in her bio on our page in the post for April 2024. And folks, we will see you next month. Jennifer RF, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you, Rowan. Thank you,
It's
Jennifer.
always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise. Bye, y'all. Have a good one.